She returned to the church where her sister vanished. The bell was waiting for her. Red Hollow, Iowa, had only one claim to fame, or maybe infamy. At the far edge of town, where the gravel road gave way to weeds and barbed wire, stood a crumbling white church. Its steeple leaned slightly, and the bell inside hadn't rung since 1984, the year the last service was held. The locals called it St. Agnes, though its paint was so blistered and worn that the name carved above the door was barely legible. The church was said to be cursed, not in the ghost story for tourists way, but in the whispered over coffee, don't go there after dark way. The pews were still lined with hymnals, the altar cloth still draped in faded white, but 3 teenagers who went inside one October night in 2002 never came back out. They were seniors at Red Hollow High. Kelly Myers, the volleyball captain, her boyfriend, Daniel Pike, and their quiet friend, Matt Harris. It was a Friday night, and they'd been at a bonfire when someone dared them to climb the bell tower and ring the bell. No one had heard it chime in almost 2 decades. Witnesses, a dozen kids from the bonfire, swore they watched the 3 walk up the church steps and disappear inside. The heavy wooden doors shut behind them. 30 minutes passed. Then an hour. The bell never rang. When 2 of the boys from the bonfire went to check, the doors wouldn't budge, like they'd been locked from the inside. By the time Sheriff Leonard drove out there, the doors swung open without resistance. Inside, the pews sat in perfect rows, dust motes dancing in the beam of his flashlight. No sign of Kelly, Daniel, or Matt. Their bikes were still leaning against the fence outside. The official search lasted 2 weeks. Dogs combed the cornfields, divers checked the creek half a mile away, and the FBI even sent a team to inspect the church. No evidence, no footprints in the dust, no clothing fibers, no fingerprints. It was as if the 3 had been erased. That winter, the town council boarded up the church windows and chained the doors. A no trespassing sign was nailed to the warped front steps. Parents warned their kids to stay away. But the stories never stopped. Some swore that on certain autumn nights, you could see figures moving in the steeple window, just 3 silhouettes, standing still, watching. Others claimed to have heard faint voices when they walked past the church, calling out in short, breathless gasps like they were trapped. And then there was the bell. It never rang. Not once in all those years. By 2022, the church had become part of the town's landscape. A place you drove past without looking. Weeds climbed halfway up the siding, and the chain on the front doors was rusted stiff. The steeple leaned a little more each year. Most people in Red Hollow believed the case was unsolvable, a cold memory from another lifetime. That's why, when the bell rang just after midnight on a windy October night, the sound was so shocking that people sat bolt upright in bed. 3 clear chimes, deep, hollow. The sheriff's phone began buzzing with calls before the last echo faded. By dawn, half the town had driven out to see for themselves. The chain on the front doors was gone. The wood looked newer, like it had been replaced. And hanging from the doors was a small, weather-stained flyer. In faded ink, it read, "Mass service tonight at 7 p.m. All are welcome." By sunrise, the flyer on the church doors had become the talk of Red Hollow. At Millie's Diner, the only place in town where you could get decent coffee and eggs, a cluster of regulars gathered in a booth, passing around a phone picture of the notice. The grainy image showed the old wooden doors, freshly painted, the flyer pinned dead center like something from another century. "You think it's some kind of prank?" asked Gary Holt, the town's mailman. He was in his 60s, with a weathered face and a suspicion of anything new. "It's sick if it is," muttered Sheriff Leonard, who'd come in for his usual black coffee and toast. "That church is a crime scene, whether the files say cold case or not." At the counter, a woman in her 40s stirred sugar into her coffee without drinking it. Her name was Ann Myers, Kelly's older sister. She rarely spoke about the disappearance, but now she turned toward the table, her eyes sharp. "If it's a prank," she said quietly, "then why ring the bell?" No one answered. By mid-afternoon, the church had drawn a small crowd. People stood on the gravel road, keeping their distance from the front steps. The old boards over the windows were gone, replaced with clear glass. Inside, it was hard to see much beyond a dim light glowing at the altar. Reporters from Cedar Rapids and Des Moines began showing up, their vans kicking up dust. They asked the sheriff about the disappearance in 2002, about the possibility that the building had been sold or renovated without the town knowing. Leonard gave them nothing, but behind the scenes, he'd already called the county record's office. There had been no sale, no permit for repairs, no notice filed. On paper, St. Agnes was still abandoned. At 5:45 p.m., the first person decided to go in. His name was Tyler Kemp, a 27-year-old YouTuber from out of town who specialized in urban exploration videos, sneaking into forgotten places, and filming them for millions of viewers. He arrived in ripped jeans, a black hoodie, and a GoPro mounted to his chest. The crowd murmured as he strode right up the steps. Sheriff Leonard stepped forward. "Son, I'd advise you not." "Relax," Tyler interrupted. "I'm just gonna peek inside. Document it. If there's anything weird, you'll see it on camera." Leonard's jaw tightened, but he didn't stop him. Maybe a part of him wanted a witness, someone who could confirm whether the church was just a building or something worse. Tyler reached for the handle. The moment his hand touched the metal, the church bell rang. Once. The sound was so loud it seemed to vibrate in the bones of everyone standing there. Birds exploded from the trees behind the building, wheeling into the gray sky. Tyler flinched but didn't let go. He pulled the door open, and a warm draft spilled out, carrying the faint smell of old wood and something else. Something sweet and metallic. He stepped inside. For a few seconds, the crowd could see the outline of the pews, the faint light at the altar. Tyler raised his phone to film. Then the door slammed shut behind him. The sheriff lunged forward, wrenching at the handle, but it wouldn't move. From inside came the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, moving toward the back of the church. Then silence. When Leonard finally got the door open 5 minutes later, the church was empty. No Tyler, no camera, only a fresh flyer pinned to the altar cloth. This one read, "2 more seats available." By nightfall, the gravel road leading to St. Agnes was blocked by 2 county cruisers. Sheriff Leonard didn't want anyone else disappearing, especially with reporters still circling like vultures. The air had turned sharp and cold, and a thin mist clung to the ground. Inside Millie's diner, the crowd had doubled. Conversations were hushed, every head turning toward the door each time it opened. Ann Myers sat alone in a corner booth, her coffee untouched. She'd been 19 when Kelly vanished. She still remembered the sound of her mother's scream when the sheriff came to their door that October morning in 2002. Now, 2 decades later, she felt something she couldn't name, not quite fear, not quite hope. Across the diner, a man in his 50s was telling a story to anyone who would listen. His name was Carl Jensen, and he'd been one of the boys at the bonfire the night Kelly, Daniel, and Matt disappeared. "I swear to God," Carl was saying, "about 20 minutes after they went inside, I saw a light in the bell tower. flickering like a lantern. But here's the thing, it wasn't just the light. There was movement. 3 shadows moving slow like they were climbing up toward the bell. Gary Holt frowned. "Thought you said the bell never rang." "It didn't. That's what makes it worse," Carl replied, his voice low. "They were up there, I saw 'em. But the bell stayed silent. Then the light just went out." Sheriff Leonard stepped into the diner, brushing rain from his jacket. "Carl," he said, "you never told me that." Carl shifted uncomfortably. "Back then, I figured you'd think I was just scared. Plus, you asked if I saw them come out. I didn't, but I didn't say they never made it to the tower." Anne was on her feet now. If they made it to the tower, then what? They didn't just vanish into thin air. Carl hesitated, then said something that made the whole diner go still. "I think they never left the tower." That night, Anne couldn't sleep. She sat in her small apartment above the pharmacy, staring at a shoebox she kept in her closet. Inside were old photos, yearbook pages, and a cassette tape. The tape had been recorded the week before Kelly vanished, the two of them laughing in the kitchen, the sound of their mother's radio in the background. Anne hadn't played it in years, but now she dug out her old tape player and hit play. Static. Then Kelly's voice, faint but bright. "Come on, Annie, just ring it. It's only a bell." Anne froze. She didn't remember her sister ever saying that in the kitchen. She rewound the tape, played it again. Static. Then, "Only a bell." The words were quieter this time, like they'd been whispered into the tape from far away. At 2:13 a.m., Anne's phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. She answered, half asleep, her voice hoarse. "Hello?" At first, nothing but faint crackling. Then she heard it, the deep, hollow clang of the St. Agnes bell, 3 times. After the 3rd chime, a young woman's voice came through the line, barely above a whisper. "One more seat." The call went dead. By morning, news had spread that another flyer had been found on the church doors. This one didn't invite the public. It simply said, 7 p.m., all witnesses present. Anne's name was at the bottom of the list. The flyer with the witness list was taped to the church doors by the time the sun came up. 7 names, written in black ink in perfect, looping handwriting. At the very bottom, in smaller letters, the words, "Attendance required." Anne Myers was second on the list. Carl Jensen's name was third. Even Gary Holt's name appeared, though he hadn't been anywhere near the church in 2002. "What the hell does that mean, required?" Gary asked, standing with his hands stuffed in his coat pockets. His voice trembled. "It means someone's playing a sick game," Sheriff Leonard said. "No one's going in. Not tonight, not ever. I'm putting a 24-hour watch on this place." Leonard didn't say it out loud, but the handwriting bothered him. It wasn't typed. It wasn't a copy. It looked like someone had written it right there on the door. Yet when he examined the paper, the ink was dry, the paper itself crisp, like it had been there for days. At noon, Anne sat in the sheriff's office, staring at the flyer under the harsh fluorescent lights. "I'm not going," she said flatly. "Good," Leonard replied. "We'll keep you away from here. Whatever's going on, you're not walking into it." Anne hesitated. "Sheriff, what if it's not a prank? What if Kelly's in there? You saw what happened to that YouTube guy. They didn't find him, not even his camera. Isn't that the same as 20 years ago? Exactly the same." Leonard rubbed his forehead. "Yeah, which is why I'm telling you that place swallows people. We're not giving it another chance." Anne leaned forward. "But if we don't go, won't it just keep happening?" The question hung in the air. That evening, the mist returned, heavier this time, curling along the ground and swallowing the base of the church steps. By 6:30 p.m., the roadblock was in place, two patrol cars idling at either end. A few curious locals parked far away, watching from the shadows. Anne sat in her apartment, pacing. Every time she passed the shoebox on her kitchen table, she heard Kelly's voice in her head. "It's only a bell." At 6:45, her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, 1 seat left. No punctuation, no name. Anne's hands shook as she typed back, "Who is this?" No reply, just the faint, distant sound of a bell ringing. Once, twice. She grabbed her coat. The church loomed ahead, its steeple vanishing into the fog. The officers at the roadblock stepped forward. "Ma'am, this area's off limits," one said. Anne took a deep breath. "My name's on that list." The officer glanced at the sheriff's car nearby. Leonard was standing outside it, arms crossed. His eyes narrowed when he saw her. "You're not going in, Anne." "I have to," she said quietly. "If Kelly's still there, if any of them are, maybe it's tonight or never." Leonard's voice dropped. "You don't understand. I've been inside that church. Not during the day, not like a tourist. I've heard things in there." "What things?" she asked. He didn't answer. At exactly 7:00 p.m., the bell rang. 3 long chimes rolled out into the fog. Anne stepped forward, her boots crunching on the gravel. The crowd of onlookers held their breath. When she reached the doors, they swung open on their own. Inside, the air shimmered like heat over asphalt. The pews were full, not of people, but of shadows, faint outlines sitting motionless, their heads bowed toward the altar. At the front, where the priest should be, stood a figure in a black robe. It slowly raised its head. Anne froze. It was Kelly. Anne's voice caught in her throat. "Kelly!" The figure at the altar tilted its head slightly, as though the name was a half-forgotten word. The black robe draped to the floor, but from beneath the hood, Anne could see her sister's face, pale, unaged, eyes reflecting the dim candlelight like glass. For a moment, everything else in the church faded. Anne barely noticed the pews full of shadow people, their bowed heads rising slightly as though listening. Kelly's lips moved. Anne stepped closer. "What did you say?" Her sister's voice was almost inaudible. "You're early." The wooden floorboards groaned under Anne's boots. Every step forward felt heavier, as if the air itself resisted her. "I've been looking for you for 20 years, she said. "What happened to you?" Kelly blinked slowly. "It's not 20 years, it's still that night." Anne's stomach dropped. "No, it's..." The church walls shimmered. The candlelight grew brighter, warmer, until the pews were filled not with shadows but with people. Familiar faces, Carl, Daniel, Matt, laughing, whispering. Outside the windows, through fresh, unbroken glass, Anne saw teenagers standing in the gravel lot, a bonfire crackling in the distance. It was 2002. Anne looked down at her hands. They were younger. No wedding ring. No scars from years of work. Kelly was smiling now, the way she used to before a prank. "See, you made it in time this time." From the back of the church came a sound like a door unlocking. Every head in the pews turned in unison toward the bell tower. Kelly leaned close, her whisper warm against Anne's ear. "When the bell rings, it chooses. Once you hear it, you can't leave." Anne's heart pounded. "Then how do I get you out?" Kelly's expression changed, a flicker of something almost like pity. "I'm not supposed to leave." The scene shimmered again. The people blurred back into shadows. The warmth drained from the air, replaced by the damp cold of the present. Anne reached out to grab Kelly's hand, but it was ice cold, her skin almost translucent. The black-robed figure's hood seemed to deepen, shadows swallowing her face until only her eyes glimmered. From somewhere above, the bell began to toll. 1, 2, 3. Each chime sent a pulse through the floor, through Anne's bones, through the air itself. The shadow people began to rise from the pews, their faces lifting to reveal hollow voids where eyes should be. Kelly stepped back toward the altar. "If you stay until the last chime," she said, "you'll sit with us forever." Anne's mind raced. She had 4 chimes left. On the 4th chime, the side door to the church burst open. Sheriff Leonard stumbled in, flashlight in one hand, service pistol in the other. His eyes locked on Anne, then flicked to Kelly, and something in his face told Anne he saw her exactly as she did. "Move!" he shouted, advancing down the aisle. Now, but Anne didn't move. She couldn't. Her feet were rooted to the floor as the 5th chime rolled through the air. Kelly's gaze softened for just a heartbeat. "It's only a bell, Annie, just ring it back." The 6th chime rang. Anne tore her eyes away from Kelly, looking up toward the bell tower. Through the narrow opening above, she saw it, the old bronze bell swinging on its own. No rope, no ringer, the sound vibrating the entire building. 1 chime left. If she didn't act now, she'd never leave. The 7th chime was beginning to swell. Anne didn't think, she ran. Her boots hammered the wooden floor as she shoved past shadowy figures that seemed to flicker and distort when she touched them. Some reached out, their fingers like smoke, but she kept moving. "Anne!" Leonard's voice was behind her, close but distant, like he was shouting through water. The narrow door to the bell tower groaned as she pushed it open. A cold draft poured down the stairwell, smelling of rust and rain. She gripped the railing and began to climb. The bell's vibrations rattled the boards beneath her feet. Halfway up, the temperature dropped sharply. The wood was slick under her palms, as if coated in frost. She risked a glance over her shoulder. Leonard was forcing the door shut behind him, but the shadows were already pressing through the cracks, their hollow faces fixed upward. "You can't stop the last chime," one of them whispered, though its mouth didn't move. Anne ignored it and kept climbing. When she reached the platform, she saw the bell up close for the first time. It wasn't just bronze, streaks of black ran down its sides, like old burn marks. Strange, spiraling etchings covered its surface, and in the center of the largest swirl was a name, K.M. Kelly Myers. Anne's breath caught. "Kelly, you marked this." The bell swayed lazily now, as if mocking her urgency. Its next swing would bring the final chime. She grabbed the side of the bell with both hands. The metal burned and froze her palms at the same time. Pain shot up her arms, but she pulled, trying to swing it backward. The air in the tower shifted, thickening, pressing against her chest. The shadows were climbing the stairs now, their movements jerky, unnatural, their limbs bending wrong. "Anne!" Leonard's voice was closer. "Don't let it finish." She braced her foot against the wooden beam and yanked with everything she had. The bell slowed. For a moment, silence. Then a deafening clang, but not the final chime. She had forced it in reverse. The sound reverberated through her bones, down the stairs into the church below. The shadows shrieked and crumpled inward, folding like paper. Anne swung it again, backward. Another deep, resonant tone rang out. From below, Kelly's voice called, "One more!" Anne heaved with all her strength. The bell swung higher in reverse, the carvings flashing in the dim light. When it struck, the air seemed to explode, a burst of wind that hurled the shadows backward and shook the entire steeple. She fell to her knees, gasping, her hands blistered and raw. The silence that followed was wrong. It wasn't peaceful. It was hollow, like the moment between lightning and thunder. Then she heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming up the stairs toward her. Leonard appeared, panting, his flashlight beam bouncing wildly. "You did it," he said, half smiling. It stopped. Anne shook her head. "Number, listen." They both went still. From inside the bell, not around it, inside, came a faint, rhythmic tapping, like fingernails on metal. Tap, tap, tap. Leonard's face went pale. "Someone's in there," Anne swallowed hard. "Or something." The tapping grew louder, faster. Tap, 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 tap. Anne felt it in her teeth. Leonard lifted his pistol, but his voice trembled. "If we open that, we might not like what comes out." Anne stepped closer. The surface of the bell felt different now, warm, pulsing, like the skin of a living thing. She pressed her ear against the bronze and froze. A voice, faint, muffled, was whispering from inside. "Anne, let me out," her breath caught. "Kelly," Leonard shook his head. "It's not her. Whatever's in there knows your name because it wants you to trust it." The voice came again, clearer this time, twisting into something that sounded almost like laughter. "You came back for me, just like you promised." Anne's stomach churned. She had promised Kelly that night before she vanished. But how could anyone survive inside a bell for 20 years? Leonard moved forward, pulling a folding knife from his pocket. "Step back. If it's a person, we cut them out. If it's not..." He trailed off, glancing down the stairwell as if the shadows might return any second. The first cut into the bell didn't release metal shavings. It released a thin stream of dark liquid, thick and cold. It slid over Leonard's hand, and he hissed in pain, dropping the knife. "Don't touch it," Anne warned, but it was too late. Angry red welts were already forming along his fingers. The voice inside the bell laughed again, low, wet, and mocking. "Ring me forward and I'll come out. Ring me forward and I'll give her back to you." Anne's hands clenched. "Give who back?" No answer this time, only the slow, deliberate tap-tap, tap-tap. Leonard bent to retrieve the knife, but the air in the tower grew heavier, the light dimming as if something enormous had stepped between them and the world outside. The wooden beams creaked under invisible weight. Then Anne saw it, a face forming in the bronze itself, stretching outward from the inside, pressing against the metal as if it were skin. It was Kelly's face. Her lips moved soundlessly. Anne's chest tightened. She could almost read the words, "Don't trust me." The next moment, the face shifted, melting into something else entirely. The features warped, the eyes bulged, the mouth widened far beyond human limits, teeth too long for the space they occupied. The voice roared from inside, loud enough to shake dust from the rafters. "Ring me forward," Leonard raised his pistol. "Anne, move." But Anne didn't move. She was staring at the spirals carved into the bell, the same spirals she'd seen in old yearbooks, doodled in the margins next to Kelly's name. Kelly had drawn them for years without ever explaining why. It wasn't decoration. It was a warning. The tapping stopped. Then, without warning, a single deafening bong echoed through the tower. The bell had swung on its own forward. Anne and Leonard were thrown to the floor. The metal began to split, hairline cracks racing down its sides. From within, a black mist poured out, moving like it'd wait, curling toward the stairs. Anne scrambled to her feet. "It's heading for the church," Leonard grabbed her arm. "No, it's heading for the people in the church." They looked at each other, and then they ran. Anne burst through the bell tower door, nearly tripping over the last step. Leonard was right behind her, his flashlight beams slicing through the thickening mist that was spilling down from above. The sanctuary had changed again. The pews were no longer just filled with shadowy shapes. They were standing. The figures had definition now, wearing tattered versions of real clothing, some in faded jeans and varsity jackets, others in dresses that might have been from the early 1900s. Every single head turned toward them. At the altar stood Kelly, or at least something wearing her face. "Anne," Kelly said, smiling warmly, "you made it in time for the service." Her voice was calm, but it carried an undercurrent that made the back of Anne's neck prickle. Anne's eyes darted around the sanctuary. The black mist from the bell had coiled itself into the aisles, writhing between the rows of the congregation. "What is this?" Leonard demanded, keeping his pistol trained on Kelly. "What happened to these people?" Kelly's smile widened, showing teeth that were almost human. "They stayed. They listened. The bell gave them a place in the choir." Anne stepped forward. "Kelly, if you're still in there, you need to fight this." Her sister tilted her head, as if trying to recall a distant memory. "Still in there? Annie, there's no in there. There's only here, only now. And you came to stay." The congregation began humming. Low, deep, harmonic, a sound that seemed to vibrate the air in Anne's lungs. It was almost like the ringing of the bell itself, but human, or something pretending to be human. Leonard shouted over the hum, "Anne, we can't stay here, move!" But the black mist was already crawling up their legs, clinging like oil. The harder Anne tried to brush it away, the tighter it wrapped. Kelly's expression softened for a moment. "You could sit beside me again, just like before." Anne swallowed hard. "Before what?" Kelly blinked slowly. "Before you let me go into the church that night, before you didn't follow me." The hum rose in pitch. The congregation stepped forward in unison, their feet making no sound on the wooden floor. The mist thickened, cutting off the view of the exit doors. Leonard fired a warning shot toward the ceiling. The sound didn't echo, it was swallowed instantly by the hum. "This isn't working," he muttered. Anne's gaze locked on the altar. Behind Kelly, she could see the faint outline of the old wooden cross, except it wasn't empty. The shadow of a figure was hanging there, slumped, unmoving. Her chest tightened. "Kelly, who is that?" Kelly didn't answer. The black mist surged upward, coiling around Leonard's arms and forcing his gun toward the floor. He grunted, struggling against it. Anne took a step toward the altar, ignoring the cold tendrils wrapping around her ankles. "If you want me to stay, tell me the truth." Kelly's smile faltered. For just a split second, Anne saw something in her sister's eyes: fear. "The truth," Kelly whispered, "is that I never left, and neither will you." The congregation stopped humming. In the silence, the bell began to toll again. Once, twice. The third toll rattled the pews. Anne's ears rang, but this was no ordinary sound. It was inside her skull, vibrating her bones. Leonard staggered, the black mist yanking him backward into the aisle. His flashlight rolled across the floor, casting warped shadows up the walls. Anne forced herself toward the altar. Every step felt heavier, as if invisible hands were pressing on her shoulders. The congregation watched her with eyes like candle flames, faint, flickering, but alive. Kelly stood motionless, her hands folded neatly, her smile fixed. "Who is on the cross?" Anne demanded. Kelly's head turned slightly, almost like a marionette. "That," she gestured casually behind her, "that's the last one who tried to break the service." Anne's heart pounded. The figure's clothes were shredded, and the head hung low, hair hiding its face. But there was something familiar about the posture, the curve of the shoulders. The fourth toll boomed, and the body twitched. Anne stepped closer, ignoring the hiss of the mist curling up her legs. She reached out, brushed the hair back, and froze. It was her own face, not as she looked now, but younger. 17. The same age she'd been the night Kelly vanished. Her mind spun. This isn't possible." Kelly's expression didn't change. "You were here, Anne, you stayed, but you wanted to forget. The bell let you go for a while." Anne stumbled backward. No, I wasn't. I left that night. I ran home. You think you did, Kelly said softly. The bell rings forward to take someone. It rings back to give them a choice. The fifth toll slammed into her chest like a physical blow. The congregation's faces were changing now, shifting, glitching between strangers and people Anne recognized. Classmates, neighbors. Even Leonard's face appeared for a heartbeat on one of them, his mouth open in a silent scream. Leonard himself was still fighting the mist, his arms jerking unnaturally as if he were being puppeteered. Anne's head throbbed. Kelly, if I was taken before, then what are you? Kelly's smile faltered. Her voice lowered to a whisper that didn't sound entirely like her own. The bell doesn't just keep people, it makes copies. The originals feed the rest. The sixth toll rang. The younger version of Anne on the cross lifted its head. Its eyes opened, and they were hollow, filled with the same black mist. Anne staggered back. The world seemed to tilt, the altar stretching higher, the ceiling disappearing into darkness. Kelly stepped down from the platform, her movements too smooth. The congregation parted for her like water. You've already been here, Annie, she said, her voice both loving and venomous. This time there's no going home. The seventh toll began, but before it could finish, Leonard broke free from the mist with a guttural roar. He lunged toward Anne, grabbed her arm, and yanked her toward the side aisle. The bell's hum faltered, as if the sound didn't like being interrupted. Kelly's face twisted. "Bring her back," she screamed, and the congregation surged forward. Anne and Leonard sprinted, weaving between pews, knocking over shadow people who collapsed into smoke. The side door loomed ahead, but just as Anne reached for the handle, a hand shot out from the darkness and gripped her wrist. It was her own hand. Anne froze, staring into the eyes of the thing holding her wrist. It was her face, her age now, not the younger version on the cross. The duplicate tilted its head. "You were supposed to stay gone," it whispered, voice perfectly matching hers. Leonard raised his pistol. "Anne, move!" The duplicate moved first, yanking Anne away from the door with inhuman strength. They stumbled into the aisle as the eighth toll rang through the sanctuary, making the walls shudder and dust cascade from the rafters. The congregation surged forward, their mouths open in silent screams. Kelly stood at the center of it all, her smile stretching impossibly wide. "Two of you," she said with something like delight. "The bell will feast tonight." Anne twisted free from the duplicate's grip, feeling her skin crawl where it had touched her. "Why me?" she shouted. "Why us?" Kelly stepped closer, her eyes glinting. "Because the bell needs a voice. It likes yours. It liked it then. It likes it now." The duplicate lunged again, but Leonard fired a clean shot to the chest. The body convulsed and collapsed into a puddle of black mist, hissing as it seeped into the cracks of the floor. The ninth toll shook the very air, and the younger Anne on the cross began to writhe, the ropes snapping one by one. Leonard grabbed Anne's hand. "We have to end this. That bell, if it's the source, we destroy it." They ran for the bell tower door, but the mist surged upward from the floor, forming a wall of writhing darkness. The congregation closed in behind them. Anne's gaze darted toward the altar. The cross was empty now. The younger Anne stood at its base, head tilted, eyes hollow. "You should have stayed," it said, and its voice was exactly hers. The 10th toll began, long, drawn-out, and deafening. Anne felt her thoughts pulling apart, like threads unraveling. The sanctuary blurred. She could see flashes of herself at 17, running through the rain that night, only to trip on the church steps and be dragged inside. It hadn't been Kelly who vanished. It had been her. The bell had let a copy go home, and that copy had lived her life for 20 years. She was the copy. "No," she whispered, the word tasting wrong on her tongue. The younger Anne stepped closer. "It's time to go back where you belong." The toll reached its peak, a blinding wave of sound. But before the tone could fade, Leonard charged forward, shoving Anne toward the side aisle. "Go, now!" Anne stumbled toward the tower. The mist clawed at her, but she pushed through, slamming her shoulder into the bell's base. Cracks split the bronze, the sound warping, splintering. The faces in the congregation began to melt, their features stretching and tearing away like wet paper. Kelly screamed, a sound that was both hers and something far older. The mist shrieked, recoiling as the bell collapsed in on itself with a final, sickening groan. The sanctuary exploded into light. When Anne opened her eyes, she was standing in the overgrown lot where Red Hollow Church used to be. The building was gone. No mist, no pews, no Kelly. Only Leonard stood beside her, bleeding from a cut across his forehead. "We made it," he said, though he didn't sound certain. Anne nodded until she caught her reflection in a shard of broken glass at her feet. The face looking back smiled on its own.